Good afternoon, dear students. Let's start our new English lesson. The theme of our lesson is dealing with culture shock. According to the learning objectives and lesson objectives, we are going to listen, read, and understand the text, do some exercises, discuss the question how to deal with culture shock, and as a result of our lesson, make a leaflet about this theme. What is a culture shock? People live in different countries, speak different languages, have different cultures and traditions. When a person comes to another country, he feels a culture shock. Have you ever heard about culture shock and what does it mean? What do you think? Imagine you were in Japan, Australia, or in Africa. Will you use their own words to describe a culture shock of living in these countries? If I were in Japan, I would write, last summer I was in Japan. There are very high skyscrapers, shops with seafood, but there aren't any fields, woods or farms. If I were in Australia, I would say, I visited my friends in Australia in a small town. There are shops, squares, parks and block of flats, but there aren't any factories or skyscrapers. If I were in Africa, I would say, I lived with Hadza tribe for a week. They do not grow crops, they don't raise animals, and they don't count days or months. These were the examples of culture shock. And now let's work with our textbooks. Page number 14 and 15. We'll start with exercise number 1. I want you to listen, read, and translate the definition of culture shock.
Culture shock. Noun. The feeling of anxiety or confusion a person might experience when they visit a place where the culture or way of life is completely different to what they are familiar with.
Can you translate this definition into Russian? It may be. Культурный шок – это чувство беспокойства, которое может испытывать человек, когда попадает в такое место, где культура или образ жизни очень сильно отличается от того, что уже ему знакомо. That's fine, thank you. And now, I want you to be introduced to some words connected with the culture shock. That is exercise number 2. Please listen and translate these words into Russian.
Transition.
Transition, a change from a situation, state to another. That's fine, переход.
Homesick.
Homesick, sad and longing for home. Тоска по дому.
Assimilate.
Assimilate, to adapt and fit in with a culture that is initially unfamiliar to you. Приспосабливаться.
At home.
At home, to feel at home, to feel comfortable and relaxed in familiar surrounding. Чувствовать себя как дома.
Miscommunication.
Miscommunication, difficulty understanding others or being understood by them. Недопонимание.
Diversity.
Diversity, variety, разнообразие. That's fine, thank you. And it's time to work with our text. Please listen to the text and try to understand it.
Dealing with culture shock. I moved to Edinburgh from Kazakhstan almost 6 months ago on a year-long exchange program, and it was a tough transition. I read somewhere that this is called culture shock, and it's a natural response to moving country. When I first arrived, I was wide-eyed with amazement. I'm from Nur Sultan, so I'm used to super tall skyscrapers and shiny modern buildings. Edinburgh is nothing like that. Every building is made from stone and has a long, rich history. The people were friendly and welcoming, and I giggled at how they seemed to apologize for everything. A couple of months in, the novelty started to wear off. I was terribly homesick. Little things began to bother me. For instance, there was such a diversity of accents there. No two people sounded the same. So often, I couldn't understand what the locals were saying. Another issue I had was that the stores closed so early. I would try to go shopping in the evening, only to find that everything had already closed at 6 p.m. I couldn't understand how people managed to get what they needed while also studying or working in the daytime. By month 4, I started getting used to how people talked, and miscommunication became less of a problem. I started scheduling my day to fit the pace of life here. My frustration and homesickness faded, and I made some friends, which really helped me to assimilate gradually. These days, I'm totally at home here. I've got loads of great friends, and I know the place like the back of my hand. In another few months, I'll be heading back to Kazakhstan. It might take some time to get used to being in my home country again, though, because I have a feeling I'm going to be hit with a case of reverse culture shock.
That's fine, thank you. Did you understand the text? What is this text about? What is the name of the main character of this text? That's fine, thank you. And now we are going to check your understanding. We'll make exercise number 3, page number 14. You are to read and decide if each sentence is true or false. Enlik believes that culture shock is normal for people who travel to another country. Is it true or false? It is true. Enlik claims that Nur Sultan and Edinburgh are not that different. It is false. At first, she was surprised by one local characteristic. It is true. She felt that everyone spoke in a similar way. It is false. Enlik thought that people in Edinburgh lived life at a slower pace. It is false. After a few months, Enlik realized that she had integrated into society quite quickly. It is false. From time to time, Enlik still has issues finding her way around the city. It is true. She thinks she will need to readjust to life in Kazakhstan. It is true. And now we'll check our answers. It's great. We have 7 right answers. We have already understood what the culture shock is. And now let's discuss the question, how to deal with culture shock. I want you to listen to the interview of social psychologist. She speaks about how to deal with culture shock. Listen and try to understand.
We're here today with Professor Davis, a social psychologist who's going to speak to us a little bit about culture shock. So, Professor, what exactly is culture shock?
Culture shock is defined as the sense of disorientation that comes with being in a new place. A good number of us have experienced culture shock to some degree in our lives, but it's more acute among people who live abroad for extended periods. Interestingly, it can be described as an emotional response, which follows a predictable pattern in most cases.
Wow, I didn't know that. Could you walk us through the process?
Certainly. There are 4 main stages, with the first being euphoria, also known as the honeymoon phase. The place has novelty value and everything is an adventure. You're essentially a tourist at this point.
Too bad it can't stay that way.
Actually, all of the stages are equally important in the end. After a month or 2, stage 1 inevitably gives way to stage 2, frustration. You start noticing things you don't like about how people behave or the social norms which are in place. For example, perhaps you come from a country where people don't talk on public transport, and you move to a place where they do. Suddenly, your commute has become twice as stressful. It's a very jarring experience. What's more, you have yet to find your feet in this new place, and doing the most seemingly simple things has become complicated because you don't know your way around. Thankfully, this doesn't last forever, and you soon reach stage 3, which is adjustment. You learn how to orientate yourself. Things cease to annoy you, and life becomes much more tolerable.
Thank goodness for that. So, what's the final stage?
Acceptance. You assimilate into society and start to appreciate some of the subtle nuances of the culture that you didn't notice at first. You make friends and develop a social circle and begin to enjoy a new way of life. It takes about 6 months to a year to reach this stage, in some cases even a little longer.
Sounds like it takes a bit of patience to reach the finish line.
Exactly. Patience, tolerance, and acceptance are the key. Integrating into a new culture is not easy. My advice would be this: read up on the culture and give yourself a chance to adapt gradually. Avoid comparisons and judgments and accept each place for what it is. Cultures are made rich by the people within, and similarly, people are made richer by the cultures in which they choose to immerse themselves. Stay open to new ideas and perspectives and strive to combine the best elements of each culture you experience. You'll find that life takes on a whole new flavour.
Well, that was very enlightening. Thank you, Professor Davis, for talking to us today. Now, we'd like to hear your stories.
That's fine, thank you. I want you to pay a special attention to the last answer of Professor Davis. Your home task will be to write a leaflet about how to deal the culture shock, and you may take sentences from this very aspect of the interview. That's fine, thank you. We are going to finish our lesson. At the end of our lesson, I want you to answer some questions. My questions are: what did you learn at this very lesson? Was everything clear? And do you have any questions? If you have no questions, I'll give you marks for today. You work very hard and you work very well. I'll give you marks after checking your leaflets. If you have no questions, thank you and goodbye.